Hello, this is Vulturefire, and this video is intended to be a kind of slightly more advanced guide to Shah'Ru, and by advanced guide I mostly mean I'm talking about the higher level stuff that you get access to, and so there are a few things that I want to talk about in this video. I will probably try to add timestamps, but knowing me, I'm going to move back and forth between topics in a way that makes it difficult to do that. But there are a couple of main things I want to cover here. The first is the level 5 and 8 Shah'Ru cards. The second is that I want to talk over some generic cards that are particularly valuable in Shah'Ru, in my opinion, as well as talk about kind of which cards I don't like in some cases. The third thing is I want to go over a couple strategies that can work well with Shah'Ru once you have everything unlocked. And I'm probably going to do a bit of a showcase of how exactly the Shade Summoning list works in practice, because I think that that is the most unique deck that is really a thing that only Shah'Ru can pull off. And I want to make sure that I've shown that off. So to begin with, though, let's talk about Shah'Ru's level 7 and level 10 passives. The level 7 passive is enemies give their debuffs to another random enemy when they die. This means if an enemy has 2 bleed on it when it dies, that bleed will move to another enemy, and so in this way, you don't have to worry about overstacking debuffs on one enemy in the same way that you do before level 7 or on other characters, because if you put all of your bleed on one enemy and then they die, you'll move to another enemy. You can just keep getting value from it. This has a couple other major effects, the biggest one being that Frozen is a debuff that can move. So if you summon a Shade and you freeze it and then kill it, it will move its Frozen stack to something else, which can be the boss. And because it just moves Frozen, it doesn't matter if the boss has, say, a frost maximum of 50 or whatever, because it's been frozen a bunch of times. It will still get frozen just immediately. So you can use that to cheaply chain together Frozen. So let's talk about. Actually, let's just get a new deck so that I don't have to worry about anything else. Let's talk about the 2 common Shah'Ru cards that you get at level 5 and 8. So at level 5, you get Reckless Chase, which is 3 mana, strike, deal 6x3 damage to the first enemy, summon 1 enemy Vengeful Shade. If you can't, lose 8 health. So first of all, I want to really quickly cover the if you can't on summon cards happens if there is no space in the fight for the summon. Normally, there is going to be 4 spots for enemies during a fight. I say normally, there's always spots for 4 enemies during a fight, but some enemies will take up multiple spots. Specifically, a lot of bosses and some elites will take up 2 spots. Thornberry Chieftain takes up 2 spots. The Vessel of Blight, or whatever vessel you're fighting in Area 1, takes up 2 spots. And then the Area 3 bosses actually take up 3 spots. So Maw and Baelator only have room for 1 Shade in front of them. The other thing to know is that these are enemies that are summoned. This means they will try and kill you, and you have to kill them back. Normally, you would think, that's a downside. Why would I want to be summoning things that I have to kill? And the answer is because Shah'Ru gets a bonus for killing them. You get your level 4 passive, a reminder, is gain evasion 1 and powerful 1 whenever you kill an enemy, which means that, for example, going back to Reckless Chase, let's say you have 2 Reckless Chases. In Area 1, so the Vengeful Shades get stronger as you go through the areas, but in Area 1, a Vengeful Shade has 15 health. This means if you play Reckless Chase once, you'll deal 18 damage to the first enemy, and then you'll summon a Vengeful Shade. And then if you play another Reckless Chase, you will kill the Vengeful Shade you just summoned, giving you a powerful and an evasion, and then summon a new Shade in its place, which means at that point, the second Reckless Chase is effectively 3 mana, gain 1 powerful and 1 evasion. And that's non-temporary evasion, doesn't go away at end of turn. This is pretty useful. You also have Execution, which is also going to play into this. Execution is deal 10 damage to the first enemy. If this kills it, create 2 serrated shivs. And serrated shivs are deal 1 damage to any enemy and give it bleed 1. So the idea here is that you're going to use Reckless Chase to generate enemies to kill, and then Execution is going to kill them. And the problem you can have with Execution, if this wasn't Shah'Ru, is that killing enemies consistently is tricky. meeting on-kill conditions tends to be difficult, especially in later areas, because and is basically worthless in a lot of boss fights normally, because if you're fighting again the vessels in area 1, there's only the one enemy in the fight. So if you bring execution, you will never get those shivs unless you bring in your own friends to kill. So that's what you are going to do. You're going to use Reckless Chase to set up shades. You're going to use execution to kill them. So that is the commons. Then we have 2 more silver cards and 2 more gold cards. So the silver cards, one of them at level 5, you get Ferric Antics. This one isn't really directly connected to the theme, but it's still very good. It is 3 mana skill. Draw the top 1 non-mana of your discard pile. Then you create 2 Leeching Shivs, and you discard any 2 cards from your hand. So the baseline for this card, like the absolute simplest thing that you can do with it, is that it is 1 mana more for a regrowth. And the reason that it would be that is that you play this, you draw the top non-mana card of your discard pile, which is what regrowth does, and then you discard the 2 Leeching Shivs it creates. And in that case, you just basically, like I said, paid 1 more mana for a regrowth. However, it can do a whole lot more than that. One of the big things with Shah'Ru is, of course, you get value from discarding. So let's say that you discard Fey Barrier to a Tricky Focus. So when you play something that discards, normally the thing that does the discarding will end up on top of your discard pile. But Tricky Focus is a mana card. This only draws non-mana. So if you use Tricky Focus or Siphon card for your discard, Ferric Antics will still be able to get whatever you discarded. So you discard Fey Barrier to Tricky Focus. You get an Evasion Ring. Then you Ferric Antics back the Fey Barrier, and you discard it again, and you get more Evasion. This is pretty good. And you get a bonus Leeching Shiv for your trouble. Or you Ferric Antics something back, and then you discard just 2 things that you have in hand that happen to give you value from discarding. And so you get, even if they weren't the thing that you draw back, so let's say that you're just holding the Fey Barrier and Blade Idol or something else, you draw back the top non-mana card of your discard pile, then you discard the 2 things in your hand that you wanted to discard anyway. You'll get your 2 Leeching Shivs, you'll get your Reactive Shiv, and just all around get a lot of value. The upgrade is even better because it's now only 2 mana, and you get 3 Leeching Shivs, which means that it is now, the upgrade version is now 2 mana to draw the top non-mana card of your discard pile and get a Leeching Shiv, even if you just discard the other 2 Leeching Shivs and do nothing else. So Ferric Antics is very flexible. It can be difficult to use properly. One of the big advantages it has over Regrowth is that Regrowth used to be able to draw mana cards back, but now that it can't, you'll find yourself with these hands where you have Regrowth, but you can't play Regrowth and then the thing that you Regrowth back. And with Ferric Antics, that's not a problem, because you play it and then you just pitch cards in your hand you can't afford, and you just have 2 Leeching Shivs, and that's sometimes valuable, and that's going to be good enough a decent amount of the time, especially since that is just an alternate mode on a card that does lots of other stuff. So it is very flexible. It can do a lot of things, and I don't think it is like a real powerhouse in the way some of the other Shah'Ru cards are, but I think it is easily a card that is worth trying and figuring out if you can make it work for you, because I have found that even when I don't love it, I'm rarely disappointed. I'm rarely sad that I have it. Forbidden Knowledge is incredibly powerful. It used to be even more bonkers during beta. It used to play for free when you discarded it, which was ridiculous. But it is now 1 mana, skill, draw 3, summon 1 enemy Vengeful Shade. If you can't, lose 10 health. So the one risk with this and Reckless Chase, if you're relying too heavily on them, is that in fights that start full of enemies, you can have problems with these cards because they will lose you a lot of health if you can't make space for a shade. That said, Forbidden Knowledge is basically all upside in a lot of Shah'Ru lists, because drawing is great and summoning is great, and this does both of those for cheap, which you love to see. And so this will be one of the key cards that you were just looking to find anytime you were playing Shah'Ru at level. Well, it unlocks at level 8, so if you have to have the level 7 passive to see it. So this card is good, but not amazing. This card is amazing. Absolutely does tons of work. Your other 2, so at level 5 you get Aerial Stratagem, which is a 1-cost gold card that says gain evasion 2 this turn, and powerful 2 this turn, and discard 2. If you discard it, instead, it says deal 3x3 damage to all enemies and lose 3 mana. So you get one of those two modes. It's worth noting, when discarded, you do not play it. It is just a thing that happens on discard, which means it will not trigger a bleed. So Aerial Stratagem is a card that does something that can be very valuable, which is that it is both a way to discard cards and a way to get value, and something that you can discard to get value. Generally speaking, I think you will be trying to discard it rather than play it most of the time. But the fact that, the other note here is you get the Evasion Powerful even if you don't have anything to discard. That's not an if you do get these things, which can be very, very valuable, since it means that it will sometimes be the case that you just played as the last card in your hand to get the evasion because you just had a kind of questionable hand and you just kind of need to get to next turn. And that 2 evasion this turn will just be completely worth it for 1 mana. But so this is another card that is fairly flexible. In this case, the flexibility is more directly stated on the card that you just have 2 different modes it can do. One of the important things here is that AoE damage is very valuable when you're summoning Shades, because you will have things to hit, and it hits 3 times, and you will be stacking Powerful from your level 4 passive, which means that this will do even more for you. So this card is also very good. I think it is another kind of key Shah'Ru card. I think it and Handful of Knives are kind of the 2 key Shah'Ru epics that you will be getting the most value out of. The upgrade for it, though, is less good than the Handful of Knives upgrade. Aerial Stratagem Plus, you just get 3 evasion and Powerful 3 this turn. You still discard 2. And then the discard mode is just 4x3 instead of 3x3, and you lose 2 mana instead of 3, which in my experience is not that valuable. But that's also fine, because it's nice to have gold cards that you can take and have them be valuable without kind of feeling like you have to upgrade them. Phase Mark is a card that I'm less impressed with. So Phase Mark is you give Mark 1 and Vulnerable 2 to any enemy. And so Mark is a debuff that is Shah'Ru only, and it only appears on this card. And it right now, balance can always change in the future. So Mark is a debuff that means when the thing with Mark dies, you draw 1 card per rank of Mark it had. So the reason I don't like this card, first of all, unupgraded, it is very bad. It is delayed to draw 1 and vulnerable 2. It's worth noting this is level 8 unlock, so you do have to kind of view it through the context of having the level 7 passive. But the level 7 passive moves the debuffs to a random enemy, which for Mark can be a problem, because if you're in a boss fight, there's a very good chance that the Mark will transfer onto the boss, so you will only get the card draw once. Because, of course, once the boss dies, even if there are Shades left, it's going to be fairly easy to clean them up. So really, you only care about the Mark as long as there are, as long as it's on an enemy that isn't a boss, or the big elite, or whatever like your biggest threat in the fight is. And so with Mark, I find that it is often difficult to get to trigger it consistently more than once. Definitely difficult to trigger it consistently twice or more. And so it is, at that point, you're just evaluating it as give vulnerable 2 to any enemy and like draw 1, which is basically Sunder, which is a common. Yes, this gives more vulnerable than Sunder, but again, Sunder is a common. And Sunder draws you the card immediately. You don't have to do any work for it. So that is unfortunate. The upgrade does bump it to Mark 2, but Vulnerable 3 isn't, like the difference between Vulnerable 2 and Vulnerable 3 isn't much. So I tend to find that this is just not reliable enough. The other thing is, if you are drawing heavily, this is a card that gets punished very badly by fatigue. Most free cards do, just because, or most zero cost cards do, just because fatigue, of course, is just a flat cost increase. So a card that you might play at 0 cost is probably really bad at 3 cost, whereas something that is, good at 5 cost is more likely to still be at least somewhat viable at 8. So like Handful of Knives, if you pay 8 for Handful of Knives, you're not thrilled, but you're still fine with it. If you pay 3 for Phase Mark, now you're really spending a lot for not that much for return. The other thing is Vulnerable tends to be less valuable on Shah'Ru because Vulnerable does not affect the amount of damage that you get from powerful, it only affects base damage. And of course, Shah'Ru tends to play a lot of cards that have very low base damage, so the vulnerable isn't worth as much as it might otherwise be. Your serrated shivs are just going to do 1 damage. Your poison shivs are still 1 damage. Your reactive shivs maybe go up to 3 damage. It's just not that exciting. So that is your Shah'Ru cards. So to recap, Aerial Stratagem, very good. Forbidden Knowledge, incredibly good. Ferric Antics, pretty good. Phase Mark, funny but ultimately kind of disappointing. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about some generic cards that I think are important to Shah'Ru. So the first one we're going to talk about is Plundering Focus. Plundering Focus is getting nerfed in the next patch. We already know that for certain. But until it gets nerfed, it's incredibly powerful. So the reason it is so good is that it is immune to fatigue because it's a mana card. And Shah'Ru has a very easy time setting it up. So it is gain 2 mana, create 1 treasure if an enemy or ally died this turn. You don't really care about allies dying, but enemies dying, again, Shades make this fairly easy to set up. And then at that point, it is gain 1 mana and draw 2 cards on average. Because treasures draw 1 to 3 cards at random, you have an equal chance of 1, 2, or 3. So the average number you get is 2. Which means that, on average, Plundering Focus is gain 1 mana, draw 2 cards, which is very good. That makes it Introspection that costs 4 less and is immune to fatigue. The upgraded version is gain 3 mana, create 2 treasures if an enemy or ally died this turn, which makes it functionally gain 1 mana, draw 4 cards, which is Introspection plus, but for 5 less mana, which is incredibly good. So Plundering Focus is probably one of the strongest, not probably, it is one of the absolute strongest cards you could get for Shah'Ru that is a generic card. So if you get this, it is even more incentive to run the Reckless Chase type deck. Let's see. Void Focus theoretically is good on Shah'Ru, but the problem that I keep hitting with it is I end fights too quickly. Void Focus is gain 2 mana, increase this value by 1 when discarded. This is very good in slower discard builds, and if you don't feel confident playing fast Shah'Ru, and Shah'Ru does have the defensive tools to survive longer term, but if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you probably, if you don't feel comfortable playing quickly, then this can be more valuable because it scales up. It gives you a way to scale up your mana in your starting deck, and you have Siphon Card and Tricky Focus, of course, to discard it. So you'll have discard outlets for it, and so it ends up working out pretty well. But if you're playing quickly, basically, if you're always discarding it to uptick it, and you're never actually drawing back around to it to get the extra mana out of it, it obviously hasn't done much for you, and you should consider cutting it. And especially with the unupgraded version, you really have to be ticking it up at least 2 or 3 times before you can even consider it being useful, because otherwise you could just run something that is like Focus or Gambler's Focus that will hopefully get you 3 mana up front. Oh, Infected Focus is gain 2 mana, gain 1 additional mana per poisoned enemy. Shah'Ru tends to be pretty good with poison, so this makes Infected Focus pretty reasonable on the character. Void Visions. Draw 1, discard 1, gain Wits 2 when discarded. Skill. Costs 0. So this card I think is a very, very useful card to have on Shah'Ru, but I think it is easy to overrate. The important thing is that you can... the important thing to remember about it is it puts you down a card overall, because you play it, so that is 1 card spent to draw 1 and discard 1, so you get +1 card, and then you discard 1, which is -1, for a net of -1 overall, because you drew 1 and 2 cards left your hand, the one you discarded and the Void Visions itself. What this means is that you will need other card draw in order to supplement this. It is not a bad card, but it will not work on its own, because in order to keep the Shah'Ru engine going, you need to keep getting more cards, and this is going to not help you with that. That said, it does let you turn any card in your hand into a reactive Shiv, or any non-temporary card in your hand into a reactive Shiv, while also, getting other value. I would generally speaking run like a Siphon Card or a Tricky Focus over Void Visions, since you end up still net down 1 card. No, That is okay. So it's better than Siphon card. I don't want to overstate it. It isn't, because you do still end up only down one card instead of down two. Like if you play Siphon card, you've spent Siphon card and the card you discarded, which is two, instead of one, and that's relevant. But I would rather have Rummage, which is discard one, draw two, which means that you spend Rummage and the card you discard, and you get back two cards in return. Of course, the downside to Rummage is you have to discard first before you know what you're drawing. Whereas with Void Visions, you can play Void Visions and say, okay, the card I drew is bad. I just am going to throw that away immediately. But I think those two are kind of the most important skills to have for Shah'Ru. I think having one or the other helps a lot with just consistency in your discard list. If you're playing Shah'Ru, you're on at least some variant of a discard list usually. Accursed Ceremony is give Curse 4 to any enemy and summon one enemy Vengeful Shade. If you can't, gain Curse 2. I don't tend to like Accursed Ceremony. It is a shade generating card, but it is also not a really aggressive one, because Curse is a fairly slow way to deal damage, and Shah'Ru is obviously usually about faster wins, and so your problem often with... and you can use a Curse Ceremony at level 4 before you get access to Reckless Chase, but I would generally speaking just wait to build that deck until you have access to Reckless Chase, because I think that Reckless Chase does so much more for that deck that it is not worth trying to do the Pale Imitation version that you get with just the Accursed Ceremony. Feint is another way to get evasion. I think that Shah'Ru's cards are good enough that you probably don't need it, but it's worth considering at least. Follow-Up Strike. This does 2x4 damage for 2 mana. You will have strikes to follow up, and this stacks very well with Powerful, so this is a consideration. I tend to find that my decks are a little bit too stuffed to fit it, but it's worth thinking about, especially if you don't have some of the other cards that I tend to run instead. Virulent Strike. So Virulent Strike, gain Envenom 2, deal 1x2 damage to the first enemy. Virulent Strike, so Envenom is now apply poison 2 per attack hit. What this means is you play Virulent Strike, and every other time you hit enemies for the next 2 turns, you will apply extra poison. This is very good with Shah'Ru, who tends to hit a bunch of times, and it is particularly good with reactive shivs that will let you cash in that poison immediately and potentially cash it in twice. So poison 2 is worth up to 3 damage, which is 2 the first time and then 1 the second time. And because you have the reactive shivs, which trigger poison, you can really get value out of stacking poison on enemies. So you play Virulent Strike, that's now 4 poison on the thing you hit. Then you play Reactive Shiv. The Reactive Shiv will immediately apply 2 additional poison, so that's 6 total. And then it will deal 6 poison damage, which is a very nice bit of extra damage that you're just getting for relatively cheap. And then everything else you play gets you additional poison damage out of it. It ends up being very valuable overall. This is a card that you'll see in a lot of my Shah'Ru decks. It does a lot of work. It also will help you turn on Infected Focus. Nice thing about Shivs is you can point them at any enemy, not just the front enemy. So with Virulent Strike and Shivs, you can pretty easily set Infected Focus up to get lots of mana. Let's see what other cards are worth talking about. Garrote is another way to give Bleed. It gives Bleed 2 to the first enemy. I tend to find that I can't quite fit it in my lists, but it's not awful. It is still a way to do Bleed. The Bleed can be somewhat valuable. Bleed tends to be fairly valuable for Shah'Ru. But I don't think that it's quite worth paying the 3 for it. Let's see what else. Toxic Cloud. Toxic Cloud gives enemies weak, frail, leech, and poison. I think that Shah'Ru generally doesn't want to spend this much mana on it, but this is a way to get out leech, which will get you some healing, and it is kind of the way to get leech at common. So if you want to have access to leech to begin with, which can be nice for kind of smoothing out your healing if you aren't quite confident in your ability to breeze through fights, or if you just want to have a bit of a cushion to let you do things like play Phase Ruse or play Demonic Power or things like that, Toxic Cloud can help. Withering Spray, very good if you can afford. Very good if you're playing the poison list. It applies poison 15 to every enemy with poison. Of course, you will pretty easily be poisoning everything. So if you're using like Virulent Strike or Toxic Cloud, so that makes this just a way to get out a lot of poison, and then you can use Reactive Shivs to immediately cash in the damage. Vicious Retort. Draw 2, give vulnerable 2 to any enemy. Free if you evaded an attack last turn. Normally costs 4. So this tends to be worse on turn 1 because it will, unless you have some way to force the enemy to attack you, you can't evade an attack on your first turn. But Shah'Ru does rely a lot on evasion. Shah'Ru starts with evasion, so you will always on turn 2, if you were attacked, you will have evaded something. And then this is obviously very good once it's free. I've said vulnerable isn't as valuable on Shah'Ru, but for the cost of 0, you're very happy with it. It's worth noting that it's free, and that ignores fatigue, which is very good. So Vicious Retort can do a lot of work for Shah'Ru, and it tends to be, because Shah'Ru is more likely to be using just outright evasion ranks rather than hidden, Shah'Ru is far more likely to be able to get Vicious Retort to pay off consistently than Merle is. Barbed Gale. Barbed Gale is gain Predator 2, deal 10 damage to any enemy, and give all enemies bleed 1. So the reason you'd be running this is for the Predator. I tend to find that it is a little bit expensive, and the bleed 1 isn't quite enough to justify it often. But Shah'Ru does love putting out a bunch of debuffs, and so this means that this will often be like 40 or 50% bonus damage for you for basically the duration. Sadistic Glee. You draw 3, gain Vengeance 5 if an enemy or ally died this turn. This is another one of the if an enemy or ally died this turn cards. This one I think is one of the weaker ones just because it is 5, which is a pretty big investment. Drawing 3 is a lot of cards, but because killing it, because 5 mana is such a big investment and you have to kill something first, you do draw 3 regardless, but the Vengeance 5 I don't think is quite as valuable on Shah'Ru, again because of those lower base damage numbers. You know, if you get 40% extra damage on 2 damage, you get 1 extra damage, and that's pretty underwhelming. So if I think if you're playing Sadistically, it is largely for the draw 3. But it is not a bad way to do that. I just tend to find that it is a little bit expensive, and so I don't love it. Okay, Ferric Rime. So this card is better than it looks for Shah'Ru, because as I mentioned, if a shade is frozen when it dies, it will apply that frozen to someone else. So in Area 1 especially, if you play Ferric Rime on a shade, the Arcane Detonation will do 15 damage because the thing was frozen, and then the frozen will immediately transfer to something else. So you can combine this with Reckless Chase. So you play Reckless Chase, you do 18 damage, and you use Ferric Rime to freeze the whatever other enemy just every time. It's very nice. It gets worse once you get out of Area 1, once you get out of Area 1 and a single Ferric Rime isn't enough to kill a shade, but it's still far from bad. I think that's all of the cards here I really want to talk about. Oh, Frost Strike I want to cover real quick. Frost Strike gives you Frost Ruin 2, which is very good because you do a lot of hits, which means that you can consistently get at least 1 freeze. I don't tend to find space for it in my starting deck, but Frost Ruin is something I'm very happy to pick up later in the run. You can theoretically use this on shades, but the problem is after you kill like 1 or 2 shades, you'll have stacked so much powerful that it's very difficult to actually hit them 5 times without them just dying. And they have to survive the damage for the frost and the frozen to happen from the Frost Ruin. So that is commons. Let's talk about silver cards first, I think. Arms Race, very good. It will draw you. So you can trigger Arms Race with the shivs, but it can't draw shivs, which means that if you have it in your list, it will always draw you your real strikes, which can be pretty valuable. Hunt, Critical, and Predator if an enemy has lost health this turn. That's pretty good. Enemies will be losing health if you're playing Shah'Ru, and the critical helps because the level 10 passive for Shah'Ru allows your poison and your bleed to deal critical damage, and the Predator helps because, as mentioned, you'll be putting out a lot of debuffs. Pernicious Idol, unplayable. Give poison 4 to all enemies when drawn, increases its value by 4 when discarded. So this is a way to get AoE poison out, which tends to be very valuable if you're doing anything with poison. It is something that gets value out of discarding, which of course is nice for Shah'Ru. Just all around a valuable card. Predator's Focus is just good with everyone because it's just a good mana card. Tyrannical Focus is a reason to use like Toxic Cloud. It is you gain Predator 1, you choose any enemy, you gain 2 mana if it's vulnerable, 2 if it's weak, 2 if it's frail. Tyrannical Focus can be very good, but you do kind of want to have at least ways to get 2 of them consistently in your starting deck to justify it. But if you have Toxic Cloud Tyrannical in your starting deck, Tyrannical Focus becomes very good. Weary Concentration, I'm less a fan of in Shah'Ru because you tend to be drawing so many cards that the fatigue is a big downside. Power Surge is a card that should in theory be great, but I tend to find that it never quite is what I want. Surprise Attack. It got nerfed for this patch, is now only give Ambushed 1 and Vulnerable 1 to all enemies, but it is still very good. And Shah'Ru in particular tends to get a lot of value out of it because you summon a shade, you kill the shade, or sorry, you summon a shade, you play surprise attack, you kill the shade, moves the ambushed and vulnerable onto something else, and so you can get multiple turns effectively just because it will move. You can move the debuffs around. Poison Splash is poison. Poison Touch is poison. Sharpest Senses is pretty good. Arcane Strike gives you Arcane Rune. Runes are still pretty good on Shah'Ru. Brainstorm is worth noting because the overcharged one, you will potentially get shocked, but because Shah'Ru relies so much on evasion, you can often just not care if you're shocked because you will just not get actually hit. Contemplate's obviously excellent. Draw 3, discard 1, it's everything Shah'Ru wants. See what else is worth mentioning. Void Spike's okay. Lose 2 mana, deal 16 damage to the first enemy. It's played when you discard it. That's the fact that it does cost you mana when you discard is kind of a bummer, but unlike Blade Idol, it doesn't steal your mana on draw. I don't tend to find space for this in my list, but it's not weak. Warcry is always solid. Adaptative Spell is always good. Overthink is fine, just gets card draw. Unleash the Storm can be pretty good because it's large AoE, but nothing particular for Shah'Ru. Likewise, like Blazing Ritual is good, but nothing particular for Shah'Ru. Mana Bolt. So Mana Bolt is a card that is actually surprisingly easy to get a lot of damage with on Shah'Ru because you will stack Powerful, you will have like Predator, you'll stack other buffs, and so it's not too difficult for Mana Bolt to be doing way more damage than you'd expect, and so it will often generate quite a lot of mana for you. I've played it in Shah'Ru and often gotten like 20 plus mana out of it, which is very, very, very good. Sorcerer's Secretion. So this is one of those cards that gets a bonus, that does something whenever you play a non-mana card while this is in your hand. Shah'Ru tends to play a lot of non-mana cards every turn, which means that you can stack this up pretty quickly and then use it as a finisher to blow away enemies that get in your way. I think that's it for silver cards that I really want to talk about. Void Eruption is whatever. It has the same problem Void Focus does where you have to draw it enough times for it to be valuable. Gold cards. Benevolent Idol is obviously a very great survivability option for Shah'Ru because you play it when it is unplayable, gain 5 shield and heal 2. Play it when it's drawn, play it when it's discarded. So just good way to get shield and healing for very, very little effort. Just incidentally while you're playing your deck. Forbidden Rites, gain 8 mana, summon 1 enemy Vengeful Shade. If you can't, lose 6 mana. So one of the great things about this is that the punishment for not summoning a Shade is just that you only get 2 mana from it, which means that there's no real downside. You'll still get mana. It's just that you won't get all of your mana. This is one of the kind of the key 3 summoning cards for Shah'Ru alongside Reckless Chase and Forbidden Knowledge. It is the one of the 3 that is a generic card, so you really do kind of have to hope that you have it. But it is very, very powerful for you and will do a lot of work. I strongly recommend using it in your Shah'Ru decks if you have it. Ancestral Memories, draw 3, discard 3. This is a reminder that if you discard multiple non-temporary cards to the same thing, you will still only get 1 reactive Shiv, which is a bit of a downside. This still can help you if you are very high on things that you want to discard and you don't have quite enough ways to discard them. I tend to be less of a fan of it just because it is net negative on cards, same as Void Visions, and it digs you deeper into fatigue. But it absolutely can do a lot of work if your deck has enough stuff that benefits from discarding. Mystical Bloom. This is another one of the ones that is a card that gets a bonus from playing non-mana cards. This is the other generic one specifically. So you apply Arcane to any enemy equal to 50% of your maximum 50% of your maximum mana. And you gain Growth 1 whenever you play another non-mana card while this is in your hand. This is obviously very, very useful in terms of how much growth you can get with Shah'Ru. So you're playing Shah'Ru deck that isn't just winning on turn 1. Mystical Bloom can be an instant way to just skyrocket to 12 or 24 growth in a single turn without having to spend a bunch of cards on it, and that can be very good. And the base case of just like spending 2 mana, it's very easy to get this to do like 10 Arcane, and then it is, 2 mana, you've gained like 6 growth and applied 10 Arcane, and that's very, very good. I tend to like this one. Also in Shah'Ru, it may not necessarily be exactly, you may not care always about what it's doing for you, so you may leave it out for that reason, but I think it does enough in enough decks that I'm often willing to keep it. Hexing Strike. Gain Predator 2, deal 3x2 damage to the first enemy, corrupt it twice if it is vulnerable. So this is a card where you do have to have a ways to apply vulnerable, but if you do, this is very, very good because Shah'Ru obviously gets a lot of value out of Corrupt because you have a lot of debuffs. Upgraded, it corrupts 3 times. So this is great for amplifying the amount of bleed on things, for example, along with, it'll amplify the leech and if it has vulnerable, give it more stacks of vulnerable, although that rarely matters. It doesn't do anything with frozen. You can't corrupt frozen, but it otherwise is just going to do pretty much what you need it to do. Although often your epic slots are kind of packed, and that can make it hard to fit this in, especially because vulnerable, as I've mentioned, it can be a lower value on Shah'Ru, so you may not necessarily consistently have ways to apply vulnerable. Demonic Power, gain powerful 2, lose 6 health and 6 shield. This is downsides that are not hugely problematic for Shah'Ru, and stacking more powerful can be very helpful. I tend to find that you don't need it because you're getting enough powerful from killing shades, but especially if you for some reason aren't going the shade route, this can be very, very useful. Final Strike, gain critical 1 and lethal 1, deal 4x3 damage to the first enemy, deal 4x2 damage if this is the last card in your hand. The important thing here is the critical and lethal. This is the only generic card that gives lethal, and lethal is very valuable when if you have the level 10 passive so that your debuffs are doing critical damage, because it means that now you have 200% critical damage, so your poison, when you get a critical hit on your poison, it will do double damage. So that's pretty good. Also, you can get double damage on your bleed procs, which is also very good. Lust for Blood. Deal 3x3 damage to the first enemy. If this kills it, gain Frenzy 1 and transform into Blood Crazed Strike. Blood Crazed Strike is 3 mana. Deal 6x4 damage to the first enemy if an enemy has lost health this turn. So the reason you're running this is obviously mostly because it is a way to get Frenzy that will be fairly consistent with the Shade summoning. Lust for Blood is an on-kill card, which means that it is normally not that good for most characters, but when you are summoning Shades as regularly as Shah'Ru is, you can very consistently trigger it and very consistently get that extra turn. Vampiric Strike, deal 3x3 damage to the first enemy, deal an additional 3x2 damage if the target is bleeding, lifesteal. So this is my preferred healing option for Shah'Ru because it is very easy to make something bleed when you're playing Shah'Ru, and then you just immediately get 5 hits and all of your health back, and it's great. Blood Offering I don't like. It is similar to Irritating but Dust. Somebody pointed out to me that it's basically like fancy Irritating Dust, and I'm not a huge fan of Irritating Dust. So Blood Offering is you create and shuffle 1 Blood Echo for every rank of bleed across all enemies, then you draw 1 Blood Echo. Blood Echo is a 0-cost silver card that says trigger bleed 1 time on any enemy, draw 1. But so you need a lot of bleed for this to end up paying off, and you have to draw the Blood Echoes that turn, or like later turns they may not be as valuable, and they're very badly affected by fatigue for the same reason those other things are, and because the one that you draw was because you draw the one that you shuffled in instead of just creating it in your hand. If you're already fatigued when you play Blood Offering, you don't even get to draw that extra card for free. It's just disappointing, I think. Mystic Shadow Blast. Summon 1 enemy Vengeful Shade. If you can't, apply 10 Arcane to yourself. Deal 25 damage to any enemy and apply 20 Arcane to it. So one of the important notes about this one as opposed to Reckless Chase. Reckless Chase damages first and then summons. Mystic Shadow Blast summons first and then damages. What this means in terms of play value is that if there is no space for an enemy, Reckless Chase can kill an enemy and summon a shade where that enemy was. Mystic Shadow Blast can't. If you play Mystic Shadow Blast and there isn't room to summon, as you play it, you will take the 10 Arcane, even if it's going to get a kill. So that's something that's very important to know. Lingering Ritual. You're playing a lot of cards, you can actually get Lingering Ritual off on Shah'Ru. That's just a thing you can do. I don't think you need it most of the time, but it is very satisfying to do when you can. I think that is all of the generic cards I want to talk about. So I do want to just show a couple fights with this list, which is my Shah'Ru kind of general purpose, dealing some damage, summoning some enemies, killing the enemies that you summon type thing. So we've got the Virulent Strike, we've got 2 Reckless Chases, we've got 2 Rummages. We don't currently have an Execute. I kind of want to get an Execute in. I think Resolute Focus should probably be Gambler's Focus. I just keep forgetting to change that. And then, yeah, I kind of want to fit in execute just to show that off. I just don't know what I would cut for it. I don't know that I want to cut the Fate Barrier, but I may see if we can get away with it. I just hope that everything works out fine. It probably will. And so we're just going to go and play through the first few fights, probably through Area 1. And then that's going to be it for this video. So, Tiny Book is an amazing trinket. Draw 3, discard 1. It's a card draw trinket, and it also discards, and that is stuff that Shah'Ru likes. I think we are going to go through here. Taking events in Area 1 tends to be pretty good because there's often there are free upgrades in a decent number of events. So let's go Reckless Chase. Reckless Chase. So this is the thing I was talking about where the second Reckless Chase just is functionally free. What should we get out of that? All right, we're going to just pitch that because we can't afford it otherwise. I think we just have to discard this. So we're going to execute, which is going to get us a bunch of bleed shivs. We're going to spend all the bleed shivs on you. You see we've got a lot of poison from whatever. Pitch that rummage. Get a lot of mana. And then we can discard to draw 2, or we can just get this kill. I think we're just going to get this kill. And so we have plenty of evasion from our murders. And now we just have to get the finisher, which we do there. The other note is, with Reckless Chase, is if it kills, the fight ends before you summon. Shah'Ru is pretty good. We'll take that. Event. So I always ambush the elementals because best case scenario, you get a free upgrade. Worst case scenario, you get a free elite fight. Let's draw and pitch that. So we're going to lose 8 health, but we're not going to care. So we need to weaken you a little bit so that we can execute. We can draw those. Let's set up bleed on you. This might be lethal. Okay, we didn't get any crits, so it wasn't. But that should still... Okay, that's unfortunate. That actually all lined up kind of very poorly. If we had gotten any of those 3 mana cards, this would have worked out great. But we didn't, so we're going to take some damage. That one's on me. We take a lot of damage. Shah'Ru is very powerful, but as you just saw, if you mess up, you can very quickly be in a lot of pain. And we're going to take even more damage here to get that. Now, so one of the notes here is I can't point this. If I point this here, I don't get the leech because it'll be dead before the leech comes through. I'm going to do this, which will trigger that. I should have killed this one first because this one hits a bunch of times, which means that we can't evade it. All in all, I handled that fight very poorly, and we got punished as a result. I think we need more mana. And I think we want Alluring Rune Heart. Do we want to remove a card? I don't think so. I think we're good for now. But you saw kind of like where this statistically is just a lot of mana, which is why I am not the biggest fan of it. In this case, though, we are going to play it. Going to do this trick again. I think we're going to get you to attack, which is going to get us ranks of various buffs. And so yeah, now we are at a lot of powerful stacks already. Just pitch that, draw more cards. Can't really afford to play this, but which can be the problem with it, is like you can't even safely discard it or without taking damage. That will kill you. Let's draw. Discard that. And this will unfortunately kill, so we won't get the leech proc. Okay, Forbidden Knowledge is great. Love to see it. See if we can get an upgrade. Nope. This is a pretty bad event for us because just we have to do this fight. Let me think. We start by drawing and then we will pitch. What do we discard? Not sure we're going to get the execution off. No, I think we can. So we're going to Reckless Chase. Reckless Chase. So we had the evasion we needed, which means that we now have all the extra damage from that. Just turns that on. So we're getting kind of unlucky here, but these guys are ambushed, which means that I can get critical damage on this bleed. So you saw like there was a 2 on that bleed, 3 on that bleed. We get more vengeance. I'm trying to think what we do here. Forbidden knowledge. Get more cards. So our goal here is to get this kill this turn because we really do not want to have to go to another turn, and we're good. We really don't have to take all that plus damage we had stacked on ourselves. Brainstorm is pretty good for just continuing to keep the ball rolling. We do always need more mana cards. Right, so we are going to Forbidden Knowledge, and then just immediately Reckless chase that one down. Do this same dance. Oh, I should hit that one with it, because that would have just been all upside, because it's given us extra doom to work with. And I'm still doing this, even though it's not necessarily the best. So draw. And we just can't afford that right now. Okay, we can execute you. So let's just get more bleed out. Let's go ahead and trigger this leech to get the healing back. And there we go. I think we take the Aerial Stratagem, although the Mana Font is very tempting. We may just take the Mana Font. Aerial Stratagem is very good. Mana Font is also so good, though. And then Frost Dagger is incredibly good. So I think we're going to upgrade. So our most valuable upgrades here. Shah'Ru's gets us more shivs. That'll mean it's a net positive on healing. And it's a lot more damage. Plundering Focus is amazing because it draws us so many cards. Brainstorm is also more draw and makes it cheaper. Execution makes that more consistent because it will be a lot more damage. I think overall the Plundering Focus is just so powerful that we can't not take it. I still don't have any cuts that I really want to make, and again, we're only going through the end of Area 1, so it's not a huge deal. Between these, I think I want to go this route, because then all of these fights, because this fight and this fight I have space to summon in, whereas this fight I don't, and so this just makes this a little bit easier to manage. It's worth noting all of the Area 1 bosses can fill their board, which can be frustrating, and just something you just kind of have to be prepared for. Let's draw some cards. Trying to think what the best way to do things is. This is going to apply Frail and Leech. I think we can actually deal with that. I should have done that first, but I didn't. I think we are going to pitch the other Rummage. Let's see, that's going to not quite kill, but now this will, which turns these all on. We can gain a lot of Vengeance. It's not lethal. That is. That is. You can sort of see that we are just sort of built. We have this engine that we've built that lets us kind of just keep going and keep murdering. And this is what I was saying about where like we don't care about being shocked. In this case, because we're just going to win, which is also pretty common. You can see where like the ability to just keep drawing cards thanks to whatever pays off. Gonna get that extra health, and there we go. Demonic Greed's good. I think we will take a third Tricky Focus. It's a very good card. Yeah, I think we are in this position where we get just kind of priced into discarding that. Let me think. I have enough space for that. Let's trigger that, because it's only one hit that we have to evade. Let's leech you. Leech you. I guess do that even though it won't actually trigger it for us. Alright. There's this. I think we just kind of need these to get our leech out. Because we're just going to win so quickly here. Yeah, we aren't going to be able to get that leech off because I'm just going to kill things too quickly. Because yeah, that's both of them dead. Why does everything I touch die? Treasure map. Oh, I forgot to talk about treasure map. Treasure map is the other fatigue immune way to draw cards, and it is incredibly powerful for that reason. Lucky Die is obviously very good on this character. Okay, so this is the one boss where we can actually attack without having to worry. This one we're going to go left. One of these days I need to figure out what all else you can get from this event, but that left option has a chance to do a free upgrade. We got pretty unlucky there. We didn't get any bonus upgrades we had 3 event chances. We had 2 elites, so like pretty good chance of finding an extra upgrade. We just got pretty unlucky. But I'm still happy, I think, with what I've been able to show off so far. So other notes, because this is an enemy and not an ally, this can't summon over it. So if you have 2 shades here, this will not be able to summon another Thornberry. All right, let's execute. Get fleet out. We are going to pitch the Shah'Rus. We are going to take a lot of damage here from this Reflect, unfortunately, but worth it. I don't know that we can afford that. Should have pitched the whatever instead. So now, yeah, now we've got to freeze out and trigger all of that leech and just do so much damage. I'll just get the kill with this with playing treasures. And yeah, we can, you know, get the good old-fashioned rummage kill. Goodbye. So yeah, we aren't doing amazing at maintaining our health, but we're not bleeding health too badly, and we are doing so much damage in the process. Take the Forbidden Rites. I need to report that this should say Vengeful Shades health minus 25%. I tend to prefer the Cursed Horseshoe. I think the card draw trinkets are good overall, but we do already have 2, which makes this more tempting. And this is the deck where you would want this. The upgrade here, I think at this point, I have to upgrade the Shah'Rus. Just because of how this is, just as a safety measure, because of how this is shaking out. I don't have anything, I still don't really have anything I want to cut. I think the deck is going great, so I'm going to keep going. But I'm going to do the rest of this off stream because I think that this has been a pretty good demonstration of how this character works, which is what my goal was. So I hope you got something out of this. And if you wanted to see the beginner's guide, it's a bit late, but I do have a link to that in the description of this video. And I will see you guys for my next video, which will probably be, I don't know, probably another run. I have a Salon Mighty list I've been playing with that uses the new Enrage. So it might be that. Anyway, I'll see you guys for that next time. Until then, toodles.